in Bergman's, to act Bergman means you're constantly working with your senses, and you must never lose that connection. It's not in the head. I mean, a little bit, but it's not really in the head. Even the emotions, which run very high in Bergman, particularly this film where people get very emotionally expressive, but even that is based on reactions from sense memory and the senses of the immediate surroundings, on the whole tapestry of the world of the film. And that's really important. With Anna, the servant, she's quite interesting because apparently her baby daughter died early. We don't get much information about it, but it happened. And she's very religious, and every day she prays to God for the soul of her daughter. And she says that God, in his infinite wisdom, took her away, when she was so young, but he obviously had a reason and all of this sort of thing. And after she makes this prayer, which does seem to be heartfelt, she immediately takes a big apple and takes a big bite out of it. I mean, immediately. And it is something about her that in one stroke defines her character. She is this extremely loving person, this extremely warm person and caring person, and one who feels definitely the tragedy of that's inherent in life. And at the same time, she's very physical and very much about the body's needs. And so to her, biting into an apple is who she is. She is this, as I said before, she's sort of this placid cow who is loving and warm and takes care of her calf and so forth, but at the same time needs to eat the grass. She's absolutely needs to. It's not a question about it. And her body's heavy, well fed, etc. And it's a kind of simple but very practical sort of sensuality she has. She will use her body to warm another human being if they're in pain. Again, not so much out of any kind of sexuality. Secrets, and she certainly, as often servants do, she knows more about what's going on in the house than anybody else, though she never says anything. But she does listen behind doors and to the conversations of the owners. And she has her own opinions, but she keeps them to herself, except when Karin's husband offers her, just because the sisters promised her something of Agnes's because she was so devoted to Agnes, after her death, because she's going to have to leave and get another job and so forth. And the sisters talk about giving her a little bit of money, and the husband says, no money, maybe just a little something that was Agnes's. But she had overheard this conversation, that Anna did. And so she says very clearly to the husband, no, I want nothing. I want nothing. And it's kind of the only moment in the whole film where you see her independence and her her power, not quite, but almost rebellion. I said before that Anna hides behind doors to listen to conversations. Those doors often get closed on her, or the owners. The owners will tell her to leave the room so they can talk privately. And that's a kind of sensory thing for her too, this feeling of being behind a shut door, shut out of the action of the household, even though she may be the wisest one there. but her opinion is not valued except by Agnes, the dying sister. And so that's quite a bit a part of her sensory world. Very interesting in the final dream sequence in the film, near the end of the film, that it appears to be Anna, the servant's dream. We're not quite sure about that because sometimes she's not there and the other characters seem to be alone without her. So is she the dreamer or is someone else? Or is it Agnes, the woman who's already dead, the sister who's dead? Is it her dream? Which, believe it or not, could be a possibility. Now, people have debated this, but it's more in a kind of thematic context. For the actor, there's more specific things to be concerned with. Is beyond whose dream it is, or that it's all their dreams, or things like that. It's not that that's not important, of course it is, but the director will be telling you. And I think what can be said about that is it's deliberately confusing. It's supposed to be. We're not supposed to really know whose dream it is, or if it's all their dreams, or it's the dead woman's dream, or it's just Anna's dream. We're supposed to be confused by that. We're supposed to think about that, to feel about that. For the actor, though, touch becomes extraordinarily important. The senses again. Because in the dream, what happens is that the dead woman awakens. And she's dead, but she's awake. And she calls first for her oldest sister. It's done in a sense of seniority. So Karin is called first. And Karin comes in, and Agnes wants Karin to touch her. Now remember, Agnes is dead. And for Karin, it's horrifying to touch a dead person. She feels as though if she touches Agnes, or Agnes's ghost, if you will, though it just seems to be Agnes, and she's lying in bed, and Agnes is begging her to touch her, to take her hand, that if Karin feels that if she does that, she will die herself. She'll be taken into the other world and die herself. And she says, no, I can't do that. No, how can you ask that of me? And she escapes, she leaves. It's very short. She instantly rejects it. So then Agnes calls for Maria, the younger sister. And Anna, the servant, goes and gets Maria. And Maria comes in, and the same thing. Agnes asks Maria to touch her, to hold her. And Maria, who always wants to appear warm and loving, but really deep down is not so warm and loving, she makes a step or two toward the bed and seems to want to do it, but she's reluctant. And finally, she can't stand it, and she gets the same feeling or a similar feeling that Karin got, that she needs to escape, that she needs to leave, and basically she's sorry about it, but she can't handle it, and she leaves. And then finally, Agnes calls for Anna herself, the servant, who comes in, takes off her clothes, gets in bed, and holds her, like, again, the Pieta, like a mother and suffering child. And it's what Agnes needs. And that's basically the dream. And again, it's all for all three of these women, and for Agnes, the dead woman herself, who needs touch, who needs relation, needs sensory exchange between people. It's extraordinarily important, the senses here. In Bergman's To act Bergman means you're constantly working with your senses, and you must never lose that connection. It's not in the head. I mean, a little bit, but it's not really in the head. Even the emotions, which run very high in Bergman, particularly this film where people get very emotionally expressive, but even that is based on reactions from sense memory and the senses of the immediate surroundings, on the whole tapestry of the world of the film. And that's really important. Now, if you're going to act something like Bergman, you're acting again on several levels at once. And you have to balance things that seem to be in opposition to each other, but are living within you simultaneously, and that lead to these unusual emotional states that are not really predictable, and that they are unexpected. They bring what I call the unexpected truth. And this is fascinating. This is one of the highest things an actor can achieve. In the case of Bergman, you have to understand really the context of these films. It's Sweden. Now, when these films were made, Sweden was considered the lead, along with not total, there were still rich people and poor people, but much less than probably any country on earth, except a few tribal societies. Education, the best in the world. All of these things. And yet, there was an emptiness that people noticed at the heart of it. So, at that time, Sweden had this highest suicide rate in the world. Now, people ascribe that to the midnight sun phenomenon of 8 or 9 months of total darkness and 3 or 4 months of never-ending light. But, other countries like Norway and Finland and the top of Russia also had the phenomenon. Even Alaska, and you don't hear as many stories about suicide. There was something about Swedish society that led people to this. It's almost as though when you have the best of everything, is there any purpose? Do you find the purpose? It's a kind of existential angst that Bergman talks about quite a bit, based more on Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, Scandinavian again, than Sartre, the French one. Because with Kierkegaard, it was about that God exists, actually, but nobody's listening to God. Bergman calls it God's silence, and he made a trilogy of films based on God's silence. In other words, yeah, God exists, but he or she is not saying anything. There's no communication. So you don't really know what to do or how to live a good life or anything, or how to prepare for heaven or hell or any of that. And yet, there is some judgment. This is very bleak. And it's very much based on the Scandinavian church, and particularly the Swedish church, which is a Protestant church. And you have to remember, too, that prior to Christianity coming, it was a pagan society, and very Dionysian, for particularly Midsummer Night's Eve celebration. Very sexual, very musical, and all of that. And this switched totally with the Swedish church, which became extraordinarily severe. No paintings, no sculptures, none of that. Nothing on the walls except maybe a cross. And women were very repressed. Men were in charge of everything. And they beat their children, they beat their wives. Everything was quite regimented. Everything had to be done a certain way. And this was their culture for hundreds of years. So even when, particularly after World War II, mid-20th century, the religion became, belief in God became much less in Sweden, really all over, but particularly in Sweden, to the point where by now only about 10 or 20% of the population believes in God. Most people are atheists or agnostics. They may be into some spirituality, but it's not conventional God worship. Yet still the culture of the Swedish church remains in the people. That culture cannot be gotten rid of so easily. And Bergman knew this. So in these films, he's talking about this a lot. And to know this helps you to understand such a character as Karin's husband, who's this thoroughgoing, male-dominant bastard with not an inch of empathy in his body. And this is supposed to be a godly type person. You see it in the priest who does all the conventional things, but interestingly enough, is actually concerned with his faith and concerned with purity and concerned with the possibility that God really exists and that God loves us and there is a hereafter, even though he has no communication with that God or with that possibility. And that's his anxiety and his doubt in his own faith. And you see it emotionally in him. It's quite interesting. And you see it also in the character of the character of everyone in the film, but in Maria, that she's more Dionysiac. She loves pleasure. She loves the feel of her senses and sexuality and drinking and wearing nice clothes and moving and all of this. And this has always been an interesting counter reality in Sweden and those kind of countries, is that there is an element of people who rebel against, in whatever way they can, against the severity of the church and the culture in that way. In Bergman's great film, his epic film, Fanny and Alexander, you see it with the theater people. It's very directly opposed between the bishop in the film, who's extraordinarily severe, and the protagonist of the film, who's a daughter of this theater family who marries the bishop and cannot stand it after a while because she's grown up with a kind of love of the senses and a love of life and enjoying her body and dancing and singing and acting and all kinds of art and pleasure and sex and all of these things. There is that countercurrent in Swedish life. You see it also in one of Bergman's celebrated early films, The Seventh Seal, where it's symbolic. The actor and his wife, they're in a traveling company of actors in the Middle Ages when there's a bubonic plague. And he's very fun-loving, and so is his wife, and they're very sexy, and they're a little even silly and clowny, and they have a little boy who's supposed to be the Jesus figure, and they escape the night. People have made fun of that whole image, but it's really quite powerful in the film. And the actor and his wife are like Joseph and Mary and their little baby Jesus, and they escape in the Bible to Egypt, escaping Herod's murderers, but in effect escaping the devil. And that's the symbology there. But again, it's the same thing. It's a counter to that severity that actually always existed in Sweden. People who were fun-loving and did love this life of the senses. And that's very strong in Bergman. So whether they're captured by the severity of their culture, it's still the senses get expressed in a more perverted way, as with Karin, the severe, hateful sister whose senses go towards things like broken glass and blood, to the more pure sister, the dying sister Agnes, who just loves the senses of a warm afternoon with the people she loves in a beautiful parkland. And to know all of this about Bergman, to understand how sensory his world was in various ways, is absolutely critical to acting his very difficult scripts. But his actors reach some of the highest levels of acting I've ever seen in the cinema. And the effort is well worth it. It makes you a much, much deeper and better actor.